there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
I'm Arthur.
And it's week 2 of our coverage of villains for the month of March. Yay! I like this
You're so
theme.
excited.
I love this theme. It's fun. We've never done it before.
I guess as much as you like, as much as I like the sci-fi.
Exactly.
Last month,
yeah.
so.
But I love a good villain. I know I said this in the last episode, but I love a good villain. So we're still obviously, that's it. Like chatting through villains in literature and everything for the month. Like last week we talked about, the foundations of things, like kind of what makes a good villain.
Yeah.
We talked about stuff like motivations, relatability of the character, like all kinds of different aspects of like how chaotic their personalities are.
How complex they are.
And everything. And I think we kind of, we went through like a fair few points on the matter.
Yeah.
So I guess to expand on all of that.
And build on it, yeah.
Yeah, this week, we're talking about villains who were able to like almost not surpass their literary counterparts, but when there's an adaptation made of a property, sometimes the villain is just okay, but sometimes the villain surpasses like even how much people enjoyed them in the original story.
Yeah.
And they almost like overshadow some of the other characters, right? In the adaptation, whether it's a film or a TV show. And they wind up becoming so popular that like they themselves are the iconic part of the adaptation.
Yeah, everyone remembers them.
Exactly. As opposed to like, yes, they'll remember other aspects, but they remember specifically that character. Okay, so how are we kicking this off?
Okay, well, I mean, look, like I said, we discussed what makes a great villain.
Yeah.
So now, if we're talking about adaptations, without going into any specific villain right now, because we're going to talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah.
But what would you say kind of like the general points of in a movie that is based on a book, what would make a villain that much better than the book? Or also probably like, worse.
Sure.
In a sense. So, like, what would you think?
Yeah, I guess better, quote unquote, like, better or to surpass maybe like the original source material. I feel like because chances are the villain would have had to have been very well written by the author originally for them to already have a good foundation. Most likely what will make them surpass is the actor and the performance that they give.
Yeah, 100%.
I think, like, it's not to say that like the screenwriting doesn't come in. It does, in a well-adapted story that works well with that villain's character obviously will go a very long way to helping that. But I really feel that the actor who's cast in the part, if like really the way that they deliver the lines and the way that they portray the character, that's often what'll make them so memorable. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side of that, in terms of like maybe what'll quote unquote make them worse, yes, can be the acting, but I feel like that's actually where the script comes into play even more.
Yes.
Because if the character is less detailed or complex or interesting in the screenplay, yeah, that's it, or just has like terribly written lines and things like that, or is badly directed, it automatically just lowers your interest level, right? If you've stripped away a lot of what made that character so fascinating in the novel itself, it's so easy to see how then they just become like one-dimensional and boring most of the time, or forgettable, just completely forgettable, really.
Yeah, exactly. They're just kind of like, they're there,
Yeah.
but then it's the main protagonist that takes care of advancing the story in the movie and stuff. So I mean, I agree with all of that. It makes a lot of sense. I would also add, I mean, probably kind of hard to get those specific examples, but obviously the performance, the compelling performance, the screen presence and everything makes a big difference.
For sure.
Memorable dialogue, so that's like scripting, I guess, in a sense. But I would also add a good backstory.
Yes.
Enough of a backstory for it to be interesting and relatable.
Like one that's actually fleshed out in the screenplay as well,
Yeah, and also, I mean, like visual design, I think that is important, because now we're talking about movies, right? It's not like what you're imagining when you're reading the book. Everyone has a different interpretation of how they see the villain, but it has to match, I guess, what is written in the book, maybe a little bit better. But also, you have to have like good CG, good makeup, like good costumes and everything. That's it.
It's your it's like your I don't know, like your Voldemort effect, right?
Yes.
In the sense that like obviously taking somebody and just plopping them into that character looking, let's say, the way that like Ralph Fiennes just looks as a person is very different than the character design that you see on screen and the way that it's that he's portrayed and all of the makeup that went into creating the look for that character. And then obviously, yes, the performance on top of it, the vocal quality that he uses and all kinds of other aspects. But a lot of what you remember is physically, because that character is so jarring.
Yeah,
right?
That's it. Actually, that was one of my examples.
Yeah.
But have you seen the early concept designs of that character?
Oh, I think I did at some point, but I don't remember.
They made him they made his face look basically like a snake. It was a very snake-like face with human features.
Which it kind of is, to be fair, in the finished product. I'm not saying that he doesn't look more humanoid. He does, but like the slits for the nose and stuff like that.
For
like
sure,
they kept
so they kept elements of it, but like that one was like very much like a giant jaw that like is unhinged and giant teeth and like eyes. Yeah, it was like very snake-like.
See, I feel like that wouldn't have worked.
So I was gonna ask, do you think it would have worked?
No, because I feel like that would have made it too out of the realm of like possibility. Like you would have been paying too much attention then to the physicality and or to the makeup effects and whatever other special effects.
Also,
they
probably would have like removed the humanity aspect of him. It was just like, it's a snake guy. You know?
That's the thing, right? Is that like a character like Lord Voldemort, you have to be able to still see that there was a person there at some point. Yeah. It's not like he was born this way.
Well, there's a whole story progression of how he became that, right? He was a person.
Exactly. He was a person. He looked, like a regular person initially as a younger human being. And this is like something that happened over time. And so I feel like it would have taken away too much from the any human aspect that character has, and any humanity of no one would have been able to relate back to the Tom Riddle side of things prior to his descent into becoming Lord Voldemort. Yeah, it would have been weird. It would have been
exactly,
weird.
That's it. So like those things are important, right? Like the visual design and the visual aspect of that villain.
Agreed.
In a sense. I would also add the extra enhancement that filmmakers or even the actor would himself or herself would add into the character, so kind of like their own a little bit take on it. I don't know, maybe they add some kind of lines to it, ad-lib stuff. Physical performance, right?
Oh, definitely.
Also makes a difference. So like there's a lot of stuff when you're watching things.
a walk, a particular walk or mannerisms that the character has, whether even if that's not something that comes from the novel, if it's something that they themselves worked perhaps with the director or members of the crew or whatever it is, to develop that kind of aspect of the character, it is something that can remain memorable.
Yeah, well, I mean, perfect example, unfortunately, not a book adaptation, but Heath Ledger's Joker.
Yes,
his mannerism, remember that.
Lip thing, the
lip thing,
tick.
how he's going crazy when things like when the bomb doesn't work and he's just like keep pressing on it and whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
he gives a very erratic performance in the film. But you're right. I mean, okay, we say not an adaptation, but they are based on comic books. Like those characters did exist originally,
fair enough,
right?
It's true.
So
it would have gone through the same process of adapting the character into a visual thing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and like on the flip side, like you said, I think a lot of it is either casting choices, bad scripting, or
that direction in some cases.
That direction, not enough complexity of the villain, cutting off backstory stuff, whatever.
And a lot of that, I want to say too, I don't want this to seem like we're shitting all over like directors and actors and screenwriters and everything. Most of the time when I'm shitting all over stuff like that, even like when we talk about adaptations, I'm shitting all over the studio, because a lot of that comes down to them deciding, oh, you need to make it short, or we need to do something more like this, more like that. And it's a bunch of idiots in suits who are making these decisions and trying to take away the process from the creatives and the people who probably really had good intentions going into this project in the first place, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, we've seen the horror documentaries, on Shudder, or even on Dead Meat, the Hell Productions.
Oh, production Tales from Hell.
Yeah, exactly. All those things that happen for a movie to not happen, or for it to be completely different from what they initially started. Like there's so many involvements that can happen that is not part of the crew at all.
True.
That makes it worse.
Yes, definitely. That can, and the editing process that it has to go through sometimes. All of these things, when you see sometimes how certain deleted scenes could literally change the tone of a film completely, and you see what it goes through in the editing process, and you're like, how the hell did we wind up with this as our final product? You know?
If you guys are interested, I would definitely suggest Dead Meat Channel, the show called
It's Production Tales from Hell.
Production Tales from Hell. Thank you very much.
It's true. It's interesting, and I mean, like anything like that, like a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that you see. Speaking about especially like slightly older films now, where there's so much information from previous cast and crew members and interviews that exist and all these things where you find out the reasons that certain projects turned out the way that they did. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of certain projects, let's discuss some of the notable villains that stood out in adaptations.
Yeah. Okay.
Examples.
Okay. So I was making a list because I was like making a list of both like through my own reading, but also through like in my opinion, at least, or in our opinion, to an extent, like how I feel, I guess, about a lot of these villains. How like when you think about the movie, you think about the villain immediately, kind of thing. Like when you think about that adaptation, like that's the first thing that comes to mind. So, keeping in, like we did talk about last week a little bit, some of the sort of interesting aspects of a villain who's like your main character or the narrator of your story, which yes, obviously can make them memorable, but also they're memorable because of so many other things like we've just spoken about to do with their performance and everything. So I feel like Norman Bates in Psycho is a really good example of that. One, because obviously he is also like essentially like the narrator and the main character of the novel and also the film. Like you do follow multiple characters throughout the course of the movie, but you follow Norman quite a bit and like his sort of strange descent and how like you're kind of aware that something's really fucking off with this character. Like he's weird. He doesn't know how to speak to people properly. He appears to have a really bizarre relationship with his mother who you never see on screen. So you're like, what the hell's going on? And like Hitchcock did a lot of that obviously on purpose when making the film. But a lot of it does boil down to also, like, the way that it's filmed, it's an iconic movie to watch, but also Anthony Perkins' performance in the film is a massive part of why it's so memorable because he just maintains such a good balance, depending on the scene, between how awkward and uncomfortable he appears to be at any given time and the amount of sort of like his descent into mania that you like continuously watch throughout the course of the movie. And I mean, like, it was so shocking at the time. Came out in 1960, I think, Psycho?
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yes, very much. It was a massive deal because of the style of film that it was, and it was also it was also a movie in which the person who you believe is your main character, who you're following throughout the first half of the movie, dies halfway through the film, and we literally flip to new people looking for her.
Yeah.
And following like that sort of trail of breadcrumbs to find her. That wasn't something that was like, it's easy to speak about that now, but that wasn't something that was done at the time.
Yeah, I mean, even now, I don't know of a recent example where halfway through the movie, your alleged main character dies.
Yeah, your protagonist is murdered on screen, and you're like, so where the fuck are we going with? And you're like, there, and you're like, what do you mean? There's an hour left in the movie? What are we doing? But I mean, and I'm not. It's not. I guess it's because we've been through so many years of I don't know, whatever stuff like Game of Thrones, where like all the characters that you're like, that's the main character, dies, and then you're like, never mind, and then you kind of like you just roll with the fact that like it's an ensemble, but that wasn't always something that was done, particularly not during that time period. That's what I'm saying.
It's very, very different.
So it's jarring, but I feel that, you know, when you think about Psycho, you think about Norman, like you think about that character. There's so many like fantastic shots of him in the film. Like there's like, you know, like that really iconic, like sort of like close in of just like his face looking all crazy. There's obviously the shot where it's revealed that like, you know, that's it, that he has like a split personality, and one of those personalities is his mother, essentially, who like lives within him, and he dresses up as her to kill people and stuff, like all of those like aspects of things. And it's stuff that again at the time was shocking because you see Vivian Lee's character, anyway, Janet Leigh, sorry, who's killed halfway through the movie, and she looks, quote unquote, as though she's killed by a woman because it's somebody with a wig and a dress on.
Right. Yeah.
So again, it was something that was like so shocking, and he carried that character like so beautifully that I feel like that's just someone that you're going to remember forever when you think about the film. Yeah, you'll think about all the really cool shots and everything in it, but you're going to think a lot about Norman Bates because how could you not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. And also similarly, I guess, so I'm going to I'm going to name the movie, and you tell me the actor that first jumps into your mind.
Oh, God. Okay. Because multiple people have played the character?
I mean, some, sure, but like it's just one of those like iconic that you see it, right? You see it, you see the scene exactly that I'm talking about. Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, yeah, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, 100%, right?
Anthony Hopkins, yeah. See, and I think actually, Hannibal Lecter is the next one on my list.
Yeah, exactly, there you go.
And it's not to say that like full disclosure, I have not read any of the Hannibal Lecter books, like Red Dragon or Silence of the Lambs or anything. I haven't read them, so I'm not 100% sure what the narrative structure is in the novel. Like, I don't believe that it follows Hannibal's narration itself. Like, I believe like Silence of the Lambs follows Clarice Starling and like all of those characters and stuff, and it's usually the character in law enforcement in some capacity who it follows. But you don't, like, even though the film is so good, you don't, the first thing that pops into your mind is Anthony Hopkins as that character specifically. That one I feel is, yes, it's a very well written film, but I feel like it's just almost 90% of the reason is just based on the performance.
Like the performance. His performance, yes. But also her performance. He's in the movie for like 13 minutes.
I know, but it's crazy that you remember.
Of course, because he was that
probably
good.
Probably the most of everything. Saying. Yeah, where that's it. He had like, under 15 minutes of screen time in that entire film, and it's like the thing that you remembered leaving the theater,
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. So like, that's it. He is iconic, and you remember.
Oh, God, yeah.
Everything about it.
Yes.
And, like, he's scary.
You remember specific lines and their delivery. You remember the way that the character carries himself. The cadence of his voice when he speaks is very particular. Like, there's so much to it.
That's it.
That makes it so that, like, that character just sticks in your brain and never goes away.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a perfect example of, like, very iconic things that you would
100%.
Always remember.
Okay, I'm going off on, like, random. I'm like, some of these are going to be random. Some of them are newer also. Like, I know a lot of the time, like, you wind up, it's easy to go back to, like, slightly older films because there's a reason that those characters are so iconic. And, like, the fact that we're talking about them in some cases 70, 80 years later after the fact, right? Because of the way that they were portrayed and how memorable that villain is. But some of them are, from a little bit more recently as well, in my opinion. And it's not to say that this character, it's a multiple, like, kind of adaptation thing. It's not to say that this character's never been well portrayed before. He's been well portrayed in tons of stuff. But the 2020 BBC adaptation of Dracula has one of the most fucking iconic Dracula performances I have seen in
I remember that.
Ages. Oh, it's so good. Especially, I will say, like, he's incredible. So Claes Bang, who plays Dracula in the adaptation, is, like fabulous the entire way through, but because it's divided into, I believe it's 3 episodes, and each episode takes place during a different period of time, from like older to newer, basically. The first episode of that show that takes place like in the nunnery way back, basically, and is like Dracula killing and fighting the nuns and stuff, is like, it's like an episode of television that just like stayed in my head after we watched it. And I've only watched that entire thing through one time.
Yeah, I remember that. We watched it together.
But I have never forgotten that character. He's incredible.
What'd you like about it that was so different from others?
I think the level of, it's not to say that Dracula's never been portrayed like this before, but specifically I'm not talking because like people will be like, oh, well, he's smarmy and this and that. Okay, yes, but I feel like that's more of something that you'll see in more modern vampire adaptations of just like vampire characters, but like the Dracula character himself, not only being the kind of like, to a degree, like the level of suave and sophistication that you've seen in other Dracula adaptations, but also the level of glee that he exudes when he's like killing people and doing horrible things is not something that you see in every adaptation.
Fair enough.
In certain cases, like they're tortured by it, and some of them they're just like, a lot of the performances are much more subtle that way, because especially in like older adaptations and stuff, that's not really the way that the character was meant to be portrayed. But the level of like mania that this particular portrayal has is one of my like favorite things that I've seen from a villain in a while, I would say.
Yeah, I really like that one.
It's so
Yeah,
good.
we should definitely rewatch it.
Yeah, we should
actually.
rewatch
Yeah,
it. Now I
it's
want to
really good.
rewatch it. I'm like, oh, that Dracula adaptation was so good. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. I guess for another one that is a little bit older. So we spoke about Lord Voldemort. Obviously,
Yes,
that's
yeah.
when you were a little bit. Misery.
Oh, yeah, she's on my list too.
Yeah, of
Annie
course.
Wilkes. Yeah.
Annie Wilkes. That's
Yeah.
it in Misery.
And because when you think about Misery and you think about Annie Wilkes, or if you just think about Kathy Bates in general, that is the one role that you think about of
Yes.
hers.
Yes.
Not to say that she's never been good in everything else. She's good in a ton of stuff. She's an incredible actress. But when you think of Kathy Bates, you think of Annie, and you think of that very specific performance.
Yeah, exactly. And I read the book
Yes.
a while back, and I do have to say, like, I think when I saw her performance that she was actually better
Than in
what
the
was
book.
written in the book.
Yeah.
Like, she did the exact same things. It was pretty closely adapted in general.
It was, yeah.
But just her performance and her craziness.
Like, it
I
elevates
guess.
the story almost,
Exactly. So
eh?
that's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Like, it was very well written. The script was good, but it was her performance
Yeah.
that made such a big difference, and you remember that.
Yeah, and you always will, and you like it's to this day people will bring it up as, first of all, an incredible adaptation of a
Yes.
Stephen King story, which can be very hit or miss, as we see, but probably also, like, because of the adaptation, one of his most iconic and memorable villains, which I don't, if this adaptation hadn't have been made, I don't know that people would talk about the novel as much as they
Probably
do,
not.
because it's a slightly quieter, smaller story of his.
Yeah.
It's a little bit older. It's not like a monster story in the more
No.
traditional sense as some of his, like, maybe bigger, more like epic or sweeping
Yeah,
kind
and there's
of
nothing
stuff
like
that
really
he's-
supernatural about it.
not
It's
at
just
all.
a crazy person.
Yes, exactly. That's it. And so, like, it's such of course, it's a very interesting study on the idea of, like, super fandoms and, like,
Yeah.
how people can become obsessed with someone in the public eye in a way that they
And she
really
wasn't even obsessed with the author. She was obsessed with the character that the author wrote. It's like
well,
next
because
level.
of it, because of that, she's obsessed with him. To be fair, like, she knows
Sure.
everything about him as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, not just about the Misery character and the novels that he writes, but I know what you mean.
But the
like, it's-
catalyst was
oh,
the
100%,
death
because she
of-
fell in love with that character in that
Exactly,
book
in the
series that
story,
he's
yeah.
written, and so that's how she becomes obsessed with, what is it, Paul Sheldon? That's how she becomes obsessed with his
Yes, I
character.
read the author. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I mean, I'm gonna bring it up. I bring it up in, like, every circumstance forever for anything, but Patrick Bateman in American Psycho is, like,
I mean, yeah, that's
again, like I
also-
said, it's a little bit like Norman Bates, obviously, like, you know, in the sense that he is the narrator of the novel. I do also feel like American Psycho as a book, and the film adaptation as well, is so fascinating to watch. Presents one of the more perfect, probably unreliable narrator stories that exists.
Right, yes,
Because
yes.
you truly do not know. And I will say the novel is maybe a little bit clearer, but even when I
Hmm.
read it, there were bits where I was like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that happened. I'm not sure where we're at right now. Like, which part is he being truthful about, with everything that he's, like, describing is happening. And that's definitely something in, like, the latter third of the movie that you get a lot of.
Well,
there,
remember
where
you were
you're
telling
like-
me that, like, there's scenes that were filmed in 3 different ways when the detective is interrogating him.
Yeah, so Willem Dafoe's character
Yes.
is the
That was super
detective.
interesting.
Yeah, the detective who's looking into the disappearance of Paul Allen, of one of the characters, and the way that Mary Herron directed the shit out of this movie. By the way, she's incredible. The way that they decided to do this is that she had him film it 3 different times, 3 different ways, which was, like, one in which he has no idea that Patrick's involved in any of this at all, one in which
Exactly.
he's sure he's guilty, and one in which he believes he might be guilty, but he's not sure of himself. And when they edited the movie, she spliced together different styles of his conversation with Patrick throughout the course of that scene, because you yourself, as the viewer, are meant to be as confused and unsure as Patrick is
Exactly.
about whether or not this cop is actually onto him and knows
Yeah.
what's going on.
So you see, like, it's even like when we're talking at the beginning, it's the editing also that might not relate to the villain itself, but how you see the villain or how it's portrayed makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. And but I mean, like, I feel, and it's funny because, like, you know, I know like a lot of people got to know Christian Bale like a little bit later, obviously like Batman and stuff, but because, you know, him basically being famous for being willing to physically do a lot for his roles in terms of like the weight loss and gain that he's willing to do and things like that. And you know, he's an incredible actor, and I would never say that he's like never given another good performance or anything like that. That's not true at all. I guess it's just also like sort of, you know, my preference in terms of this, but like I really wish now that we got to, I feel like he's past this point, but that we got to see him do more of this sort of like almost like a really dark comedy to an extent, because part of the film is kind of portrayed that way. And he's so good. He's so good in this movie, and this character becomes iconic so much because of the level of like restraint that he tries to exude in different scenes, where he tries to, you can see he's trying to hold himself back from being a little bit too crazy, but he's not very good at doing that. So the character's iconic. And I will say part of it is also because of the script of the film. They took a lot from the novel when they wrote it, but it was really good. And I know that Mary Harron had to fight tooth and nail, and she lost the film for a while because she wanted Christian Bale to play that character so badly, and the studio wanted Leonardo DiCaprio to do it.
No.
So they took the movie away from her for a bit, and then she came back to a slashed budget, but she got her actor, and I think that the movie is better for it. And it's not, yes, Leonardo DiCaprio probably would have been fine, but it would have been a really different movie.
Yeah, he would have played it too maniac, you know, like
I think
like
so
in
too.
Shutter Island type of thing.
Maybe.
It would have been just too much.
Maybe he would have been like too. His eyes would have been too crazy. I feel like Christian Bale's very good at just keeping himself on the precipice of that, where he still looks like a normal dude. So you're like, I don't know. Is there something wrong with him? Maybe.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
So we mentioned, so, you know, like, I guess comic books count as adaptations.
They do.
Well, I mean, fine.
I have one too. I have one.
Well, so we mentioned the Joker, right? Heath Ledger. So we mentioned that. But there's also one that is, I think, important to mention. I don't know if, I mean, I feel like it was a popular TV show. It was a TV show adaptation, right? But Jessica Jones, Kilgrave.
Oh God, he's so fucking good.
Oh my God,
I mean, like, okay, so I adore David Tennant.
Yeah, that's why I put it in there, because I was like, oh yeah.
I adore David Tennant and everything. But man, I will say, though, the television Marvel adaptations that originally Netflix had, they did some good fucking casting in those shows. Not Iron Fist. Iron Fist was bad. But the other shows like Daredevil, which my understanding is the new one that's coming on Disney Plus, is really good.
Yep.
And
I heard some ratings are not amazing, but I heard that it's actually good.
Overall, that it's very good.
Yeah.
I've heard that from like a couple of people and read a little bit online. And actually, in that same vein, another person that I had on my list was actually Wilson Fisk, because I feel like Vincent D'Onofrio like is that character, basically.
Yeah.
Like really like going from like the TV show and now to the degree that, like, you know, they've carried him through everything. He's made appearances multiple times now. I don't think that anybody can picture anybody else playing that character now.
Yeah,
where like Wilson Fisk existed in the comics and maybe in a couple of cartoons before, but I feel like he was a lesser known one a little bit. So people maybe didn't pay as much attention to him before. I truly feel that the adaptation and Vincent D'Onofrio playing the character really elevated the idea of that character from, I guess, someone that seemed like more of a simple mob boss before to something more. He has backstory, he has emotion about things, he has reason for doing what he's doing, and it makes you actually appreciate the character and have him not just be like some one-dimensional like supervillain type who's just like, I'm a bad guy. Like sometimes they do that and it's boring, and this character could have been incredibly boring, but I feel like the performance and the writing really
it was amazing.
works
I mean,
in his
he
favor.
looks exactly like the original comic book characters as well.
He does a lot as well, which I guess like it helps for sure. And I think he was willing to also like, you know, do a little more to maintain that too, to an extent, which is cool. But yeah,
that's it. But yeah, that's it. Like in the same vein, I guess Marvel stuff like Kilgrave, like I mentioned.
Oh, so good.
Insane.
That's
right?
he's like a terrifying character. He's very
so that's
scary.
the thing, right? Like he's super terrifying, disturbing, and like his power is so
it's so scary.
Scary and crazy that just I feel like even if he was portrayed in a poor or a bad way, just his power and what it can do
Yeah.
and what you can imagine it can do, which they even showed some parts of it, just makes it so insane.
Yep.
And also memorable that
Agreed. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
it's chilling, you know. But I mean, obviously, you know, David Tennant is just so good at it.
He's wonderful in everything.
Elevates it to another level.
Yeah, but I do remember like watching the first season of that show, and I remember being like viscerally uncomfortable because that character is so fucking scary, and the idea of obviously like, you know, having a female protagonist who had to suffer because of him without being able to protect herself. Obviously, like, you know, it hits home for women just a little bit more, like watching something like that and watching the manipulation and like the abuse that he puts the like multiple different like women through obviously makes difference, but it's just really well adapted, and it's just he's an iconic villain in that sphere in a way where like a lot of Marvel villains like come and go and you forget that they existed, but he's not one that you do.
Yeah, that's it. There's another one that has a duality now, in terms of having a villain that is iconic. I guess the other one was so-so. Pennywise.
Oh yeah,
the old one. I feel like
they both are in such different ways.
They are in different ways, but I feel like the new adaptations, Bill Skarsgård, he overtook.
Kind of, yeah, but it's such a different adaptation as well. At a different time, like you can feel the time difference between them, and obviously, like in terms of, you know, making a character like this for an audience and what they can or cannot. Do it would have been too much in like the early 90s to do what they did with like the 2017 adaptation, obviously, and to take the character in that direction. I think it would have been, I don't think audiences would have handled it very well. But as time goes on, we become more desensitized. So, you know, it's normal we can handle more as an audience.
Yeah, for sure. But like I read the book and I saw the older movie and the new ones. Yeah. And I have to say, like, if someone tells me Pennywise, what I see in my head is Bill Skarsgård.
Agreed. I understand.
Like,
yeah, I get it. No, I get it. And it's not, that wouldn't take anything away from Tim Curry.
No, of course.
I love Tim Curry. Yeah. And really in like an adaptation like the mini series from the 90s, he was incredible.
He was very good.
So
I didn't find him scary.
He's creepy. But he also doesn't have. It's also part of that too, in my opinion, is the writing and the effects and things like that, and like stuff that adds to that character.
The effects, the lighting. I feel like he was always like fully
and the character
brightly lit. Yes, like, okay, it's and just a clown guy.
Also, the character design as well is so different between them, and that in and of itself can make a huge difference. Whereas, like because the Tim Curry one looks much more like a traditional clown that you think of when you think of like a birthday clown. The later adaptation with Bill Skarsgård, that character design was so purposeful. You can see it, the effect that it has from the makeup, the hair, the costume.
That it's all like burned down and everything.
Casting someone like Bill Skarsgård, who first of all is an incredible physical performer, obviously, and vocal performer. We've just seen that with like Nosferatu and everything as well. But also is willing to go to such lengths in terms of like his own physicality as a character, and also having somebody very tall and skinny like portray that character because he towers over those kids.
Yes,
and that makes a difference because he's more physically imposing.
That's it.
As
yeah,
that
exactly.
Character.
So just goes back to what we were saying previously, right? Is that like those things make a difference.
Yes, definitely. They definitely can. And that's why the casting can be so purposeful that way sometimes as well.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to shoot off like a few sort of final ones so we can kind of wrap things up a little bit, because I mean, like there are so many good ones.
We can talk about this for an hour. Yeah.
Okay, so quickly, the Darkling in the Shadow and Bone adaptation, probably mostly because he's played by Ben Barnes, so that I feel like was a performance thing across the board. Made it also really hard for the book girlies in general to ever root against him because he's played by Ben Barnes. So we're all like, oh no, how terrible. I'm definitely not attracted to this character.
No idea what you're talking about.
I know, it's fine. Shireen knows what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I don't care because I have feelings about this all the time. Arrow, as played by Michael Sheen in the Twilight Saga. I don't think that character would have been as good if somebody else had played him, but he played
really fun.
He played him with a level of manic glee that you don't get in the book, but in the movies he's so memorable because he's so ridiculous, and I love it, and it's incredible. And I love Michael Sheen. I think he's great, but just that character specifically is very elevated in the films versus in the novels, in my opinion.
It was really good. I have to.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
I watched it.
Yeah, that's right. We did a whole Twilight watch.
Yeah, with a lot of wine.
It helped, didn't it?
Yes.
It softens the blow. And then I will say I've got to give one way back to the classics just to, kind of keep in that. This one is performance, it's writing, it's the look of the character, it's everything, which is The Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, okay, yep. I had it on my list as well somewhere.
Yeah, there is no way. First of all, what was her? Oh gosh, I can't remember her last name, but the actress's name was Margaret, who portrays that character in the film.
Margaret Hamilton.
Hamilton, thank you. Who plays Miss Gulch and also the Wicked Witch of the West after Dorothy goes into Oz. That character, everything about her look, her voice, sets the tone for like so much of what we see of like more modern witches and adaptations. The green skin, the cackling that she does, all of that stuff, like all of those choices that were made remain with people now.
Carried over through time.
Yes, exactly. Like, and I mean, like, that character is so iconic that she got her own fucking spin-off franchise and stuff, and like, we're still doing stuff about it to this day. Wicked Part 1 is out and the second part's coming out this year. You know what I mean? Like, she got an entire musical. So all of that to say that character I don't think would be as big if it weren't for the portrayal in the movie.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Maybe one or two questions to close it up.
Mm-hmm.
So, in general, right, do you think some villains like benefit from being seen visually?
Yes.
Rather than what is imagined in the books when you're reading?
I think Pennywise is a great example of that.
That's true.
That's an incredible example of that, right? Seeing that character is, like, not that it's scary in the book, but it's so much scarier to watch. Like a lot of the stuff, something as simple as the opening scene of the film with Georgie in the sewer is so scary because of you physically watching that happen to this adorable kid. It's so terrifying.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good example.
I think he's a perfect example of that. There are others as well, but that is like immediately what popped into my head. So yes, I definitely think it doesn't have to always happen, but I definitely think that there can be quite a benefit to a physically adapted version of a villain.
Yeah. Seeing it visually.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. No, I agree that's also a very good example. Who would you want to see? Like, what's a good book villain that you want to see adapted?
Oh shit. Oh, you really put me on the spot here.
Something you've read recently? I don't know.
I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like I don't know. That's actually really hard. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Not that I haven't read anything good, but I guess more recently I haven't read anything with like a villain that's iconic. They're integrated into the story, but like they haven't necessarily stood out
in
any massive sort of way, which again, does say something to an extent about certain stories, because you can kind of tell that to an extent maybe more modern stories are doing things a little bit differently, where you don't have one overarching villain all the time. You have people who are very gray, or people who exist in these in-between spaces in a way, which I think kind of makes a difference in that. Now I'm literally thinking about it, because, I'm thinking about, like, I'm like, oh, well, I've read Fourth Wing, and, like, like a few other things like that, but I'm thinking about them, and I'm like, yeah, they're shitty characters. Like, there are characters who are crappy people, or, like, not nice particularly, and, like, not good people, and they do horrible things, but it's not like like it's not like a Voldemort character. Like it's
Right,
not like
they're
that
not
character
that
that you're like, this
grandiose.
villain is like grandiose. It's
Yeah.
this one villain and they are grandiose and they are, at the center of so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you
I don't
have
know.
anyone?
So I would say, because I'm still like in the middle of it. I mean, I'm just waiting for the third book, the Paradise One and the Revenant X, the Red Space series from David Wellington.
Yeah.
Like we spoke to him. We asked him a couple of questions, and
Yeah.
it was like, "Hey, man, are we gonna get this adapted?" And it's always like, "Hey, I would love to have it adapted
Yeah,
if
for sure, yeah.
they want to do it." But the villain, or I guess the bad guy in those books,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that they are so crazy, grandiose. Remember all those things we discussed about? It's a great villain, but it is so different that I would love to see how it would be adapted to
Okay.
screen. Because the villain is literally a mental parasite.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Remember we spoke about it a little bit?
But that's oh god, that's so different too.
Well,
I
so
don't know how you would do
the
that.
thing is that like in the first book it is a mental parasite,
Yeah.
right? That can like infect you and AI systems and whatever it is. But then it doesn't have a physical body form, but it does exist as like an entity.
Okay.
And then it gets, spoilers, implanted into one of the main characters.
Right.
And then there's kind of like a duality, and they're fighting and they're collaborating together. So that's what I would want to see, is that how that person would behave normally as the normal character who's the protagonist. But then at the same time, there are moments that the villain takes over and it changes completely what's going on. That would be very interesting. You would need some high caliber actor for
acting
this.
in that, yeah, for sure.
Because it's completely different
you need
character.
good writing, good editing, and good acting. I would
Yes.
say as a combination for that to work
That's
really
it.
well.
So that would be very, very interesting.
That could be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Because that's it. I find what I'm thinking of. I mean, obviously the things. I guess it's more like a question of wanting to see a really cool version of this stuff on screen. So like any of the newer Grady Hendrix stuff that's being adapted.
Okay.
And again, it's not always about, the stories are not always about one like super villain type of villain, but like I know that HBO is adapting the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
I heard about that.
That version of a vampire, I'll be very interested to see how they, especially physically, like how they put that character together.
Yeah.
Because we're going back to vampires are gross, they're not hot kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I mean, it's like a combination in that story, but like a little bit of both. And he has a novel called Horror Store, which is like a take on a haunted house story, but it's
an IKEA.
It's set in an IKEA adjacent story.
Yeah, that's it. I remember.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like a fake version of like IKEA that's only written for the book. And that one is like it is like a haunting basically, and there are like some very scary passages in that book. Because it's like, anyway, the store is built on like a burial ground and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like demons and like ghosts and things like that. That I would be super interested to see like an adaptation in a brightly lit IKEA style store of something so jarring like that like goes so against like the very modern minimalist look of stuff like that type of furniture store, but like with like a creepy old haunting in it. Anyway,
That's
that'd
it.
be cool.
Yeah. Wow, that'd be really interesting. I mean, look, we spoke to him before.
Yeah, you
Maybe
never
we'll
know.
just reach out and get some scoops.
Get an idea of that. I mean, I'm really looking forward to Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So, and I'm about to start Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which is his most recent publication. So I'm gonna get started on that one because I've heard a lot of good things about it. Don't overhype me, internet. I haven't read any spoilers. I just want to read the book, and that's it.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, God, we could talk about this forever. But anyway, we're going to continue all of our chats, obviously, about villains and everything to do with villains in literature next week.
What's the next week episode?
Okay, yeah. Next week, we're going to be talking about the ideas behind things like villains, but also anti-heroes or like morally gray heroes, and kind of like what some of the major differences are between those, and how to spot the difference kind of between those when you're reading something. So
nice. Well, if you're listening this far, now you know what's next week.
Yeah. Anyway, so in the meantime, obviously, feel free to check out everything that we have going on over on the website at fullybooked.ca. You can sign up for the newsletter there as well, fullybooked.ca/newsletter. And you can check out, anything that we have that we're posting on our social social media. So Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. Just search for Fully Booked CA. In the meantime, anyway, you can check out all of that. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Ciao, guys.